My name is Philipe Moriel. I'm an associate professor here at the Range Cattle Research and Education Center. So today's webinar, you guys might have seen some of this data that I'm going to present, but not all. Now we have all the data set for the whole study. And we found something very interesting on these studies that I think is going to be very applicable to producers, and it's going to open a lot of opportunities in the future. Okay, so the whole idea here is that perhaps we should start thinking more about the overall gut health of the animal as a way to improve the performance. Okay, not just the rumen level, but also at the intestinal level. So this research with probiotics, okay, it's also known as direct fed microbials. So the research with this type of product, it exists for over 30 years. It's not nothing new, right? But a lot of the focus up to recent, maybe 4 or 5 years, has been at the rumen level. How can we improve rumen fermentation for dairy cattle and for feedlot performance, right? Now, if you look at the literature, there's almost none with DFM supplementation for cow-calf production. So the first studies that were done is the ones that we did here at ONA. So we're pretty proud of that, and it unleashed very interesting results. Now, how does this product work? Okay, it's very simple. First, like I said at the beginning, it can actually help increase fermentation in the rumen. So for example, when you add this probiotic, and this is the same one that we used in our studies, okay, this bacteria called Bacillus. So when we add this type of product, this type of bacteria to the fermentation, like in these studies, we see an increase in the fiber digestibility, all kinds of sources of forage, right? And you guys can see that sometimes the increase varies a lot. And this is primarily because of the forage quality. It seems like that the evidence that we have so far is that the increment is higher when you have low quality forage. And the increment is a little less as the forage quality increases. And sometimes this doesn't happen. Okay? This is a good explanation why you guys are going to see some variation in terms of responses in performance that we see in our studies. It could be this interaction of forage type and forage quality. But overall, this is good news because cow-calf, you're relying primarily on forages, and here, Florida, Southeast United States, it's primarily low-quality forages most of the time. So the potential for improvement with using this type of bacteria, it's high. But recently, they also found out there's a lot of benefit in terms of the intestinal level. The intestine is a very important organ because it controls a lot of our physiology too. It's not only for absorbing nutrients, but it produces hormones and other metabolites that can actually control our entire health and our entire metabolism. So what they've seen that, for example, that one of these mechanisms that this type of bacteria help is that they decrease the proliferation of pathogens. So they make it harder for those pathogens, these bad bacteria, to grow because they produce antibacterial factors that will kill those bacteria, right? Or it will compete for ingredients. Just by competing with the nutrient source, right, in the gut, it makes it harder for those bacteria to proliferate. So you can see there's a significant reduction in the population of those bacteria, for example, Salmonella and Clostridium, right, when you provide the supplementation of these products. And another mechanism is that they bind to the intestinal cells. So in our intestines, we have here there's a single layer of cells that control the absorption of nutrients and other pathogens or other microbes. And then you have the lumen, okay, in the interior of the intestine. So what you can see here is that the microbiome of our intestines, even humans, all species, they're colonized by bacteria. Okay, they pretty much create this coat all over the intestine. And they're good because they participate in the digestion. They also act as a barrier. So when you provide probiotics, what are you doing? A lot of these good bacteria, they are occupying the space that other pathogens would be occupying. So now these pathogens, they remain free in the intestine, and they can be easily excreted or eliminated. All right, so just by competing with binding sites, nutrients, and actually killing those pathogens, you can actually reduce significantly. So for example, this study here reduces the binding of E. coli in the intestines of those cells when you provide this probiotic. So the implications of these results are really high, right? Now, I'm not going to go over all the modes of actions, okay, because there's a lot of them, but overall what it does, it improves the function and the integrity of the intestines, and also helps with the rumen fermentation. So these combined, they can actually increase growth, new production, reproduction, right, and the health of the animal, depending on what you do. But like I said at the beginning, most of the research was on with dairy and feedlot. And this is logical, right? Because those are animals that experience more challenges. They're exposed to pathogens, to BRD, for example, and other metabolic disorders that the cow-calf is not really exposed to. But the fact that we have a lot of benefits to rumen fermentation, improving forage for digestibility, perhaps that should be enough of a reason to do in cow-calf, because it can help those animals harvest more nutrients out of the grass that we have. So I'm going to show you data from 2 studies. The other one with the replacement heifers, I'm going to show you later in a later webinar. Okay, this is a 2-year study that was funded by the cattlemen's. I'm going to show you 2 with cow-calf. First, with the heifers being pregnant for the first time, and the second one with multiple counts. And for all those studies, we use this product here. Okay, it's called Bovacillus, and it has a combination of 2 strains of Bacillus, right? 2 different species of Bacillus. And the reason that we use it is because this product here, it's in a spore form. What it means is inactivated once it's in the bag. It only activates once the animal consumes. It reaches a low pH, then the bacteria start to germinate. This is really good because it doesn't require special storage. You can actually keep it in any barn as long as it's protected from humidity and heat. Other probiotics, they require refrigeration. So that would be really hard in a cow-calf situation to provide to producers, especially if they have to provide on a more frequent basis. So this product here, it helps. We picked it because it's very convenient for cow-calf, considering the logistics obstacles that we have. So the first one that I'm going to show you, we published it last year. It was a 2-year study that we looked at maternal performance. Those are pregnant heifers that we fed them throughout pregnancy, and we look at the performance of the cow and the calf. Okay, so for that study, it was very simple. All animals are on Bahia grass pastures, all brainless heifers, pregnant for the first time, and they're receiving about 2 pounds of soybean hulls every day. And the product, and then each treatment consisted of no product added to that, or the product added to the other treatment. Okay, so 3 grams per heifer per day. So a very small amount. For this study here, the cost of adding that to each heifer was roughly $8. Okay, so it's very minimal cost, very easy to do. So we started about 3 months before calving, I'm sorry. And then they continue to receive their products throughout calving, all the way into the beginning of the breeding season. So at the start of the breeding season, we early weaned the calves. So the mothers went with the bulls, and the calves were early weaned at 3 months of age. After early weaning, we put them in a dry log, and we controlled their diet 100%. So they were fed the same diet as much as we could, around 3.25% of their body weight. So that's the max that they could eat. And we really wanted to push them to gain as much as we can. And then we do that because, like I said, we control the diet. So there's no influence of anything else. And during this time, the calves did not consume the product. In fact, the calves never had access to the supplements throughout the study. So we supplemented the mothers, and they were given in a feed bunks that were elevated. So as those calves were being born, they're too small to reach the bunk from their mother. By the time they are 3 months, they're barely reaching it, and that's when we early weaned them. Okay, so in fact, they never had contact directly with the supplement, but they interacted with the mother, okay? But they didn't consume during the pasture and did not consume during this time. So what we wanted to see is that if there's any residual effects on the performance, is because how we fed their mothers. So what did we see in terms of performance of the heifers? One of the most important factors we look at is body condition score. That's what we really care. And then you see that by the time they were calving, heifers that were supplemented with the product, with the Bacillus, they gain more body condition score. They calve in better body condition. Both of them calve in excellent condition. The body condition score 6 is what's the optimal body condition you want. But adding the product gave them an extra benefit. And so this greater body condition score during the pre-calving period is important because it does help with calf development. We have seen other studies done at this site that when we increase their body condition score during late gestation, we actually increase weaning weights, immune function, and other performances of the offspring. So this is highly desirable. I want them to gain condition. Now, like I said, they both calved in great condition. Once they calve, they start losing condition a lot. Okay, that's because they're on grass. So, and obviously their requirements is much higher than what the grass can provide at that time of the year. So by the time we start the breeding season, there's no differences in their body condition score. So the extra advantage that happened here at calving really didn't didn't carry out all the way to the breeding season. And that explains why we don't see any effects on their pregnancy rates. But remember, we early wean the calves here. If we have not early weaned them, pregnancy rates of those first calf counts will be roughly 50%. And then perhaps in that scenario, the product would have helped a little bit more. But they kept as well as they got pregnant as well as they could, and that extra advantage didn't really help reproduction. However, remember, they gain more during the pre-calving period. So this is highly important for the calf performance. Now, what happened to their metabolism? Okay, we look at their blood to see what's going on, because whatever is going on in the blood is a good indication of what's being passed to the calf. Okay, 100% of the supply going to the calf during pregnancy comes from the mother, comes from their blood. Amino acids, other nutrient sources, they're all coming from the maternal blood. So we look at their blood to see what's going on, right? The first thing that we look is glucose. Glucose is a primary energy source. It's also essential for the calf during pregnancy, and it's a good indicator of how much energy they're consuming. So the calves, the heifers that consume the product, they have higher glucose concentrations for most part of the study. Now, that's a good indication that they either ate more forage or they were digesting the forage a little bit better. So they were harvesting more nutrients out of it. But whatever mechanism happened, that's what we want. We want them to be more efficient. And increasing the glucose during pregnancy, that's something that we see that's actually good for the calf. We also did an analysis during pregnancy. Okay, this was done only one day. This is 30 days before they calved, right? Trying to look at more specifically what's going on in their blood that could help the calf develop. So we did this analysis that's called the metabolome, and Vinicius was the one that did that. And this measures pretty much over 400 metabolites. Some of them I never even heard in my life. But somehow when you combine all of them, it can actually make a lot of sense. It gives you a good picture of what's going on in their entire metabolism. So what we found out is that there's a lot of metabolism pathways that were impacted by supplementation of this product. And what it does, that when we provided us this bacillus bacteria, we shifted their energy and protein metabolism of the mothers. So we increased the concentrations of 3 amino acids in the blood of the mother. They're highly important for fetal development, especially methionine. Methionine is an amino acid that's involved in epigenetics. So it provides methyl donors that causes epigenetic effects. So if you don't know, that's turning on and turning off genes. Okay, and if that happens during pregnancy, that can actually carry out in the calf for the rest of his life. Right? So we're increasing the amino acid in the blood of this mother that is highly correlated with the epigenetics. Now, I don't know exactly where this methionine is going. Is the mother using everything or is it going to the calf? But if you think about that 100% of the supply for the fetus is coming from the blood of the mother, then it's very likely that those amino acids are reaching the fetus too. And we also increased other other components here. I'm not going to explain each one of them, what they do, but overall, they're all involved with energy supply and energy efficiency. So it seems that you're increasing these metabolites, the signal that the metabolism of those heifers that were consuming the bacillus were more efficient. They were either harvesting more energy or they were supplying more energy to the body. Okay, so that's what we wanted. Now, part of the explanation is what it does to the microbiome. So when you provide some type of bacteria, like I told you at the beginning, it can actually prevent the growth of pathogens. And this is what happened in at least in 1 day of the study. So those heifers that were supplemented with the bacillus, they actually decreased the percentage of Clostridium in their feces. Right, they were not going through clostridiosis, they were not sick, but this is just to show you that by providing this type of product, you can actually prevent some of the growth of these pathogens. But something else that we saw is that there's other consequences to the rest of the microbiome of the animal. By providing one type of bacteria, you can actually cause a shift in the entire microbiome in the gut. Okay, so what we saw, we increased this type of bacteria. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name, but they are involved with the energy production. carbohydrate digestion, protein digestion. So you're increasing the population of bacteria that seems to be enhancing how they are fermenting carbohydrates, how they're using this energy. And that helps explain why some of the metabolome was doing better, why they were increasing their supply, explain why they were having better body condition score. So everything now connects very beautifully, right? So it's not as perfect as we expected, but it makes sense. Everything is connecting in the right way. Explain why those cows had a better performance. Now, after I said all of this, what does it do to the calf, right? That's what really matters. So we see at the time of birth, there's no difference in birth weights. When they were early wean, 3 months of age, no differences in their body weight. 14 days, 16 days later, they enter the dry lot. They start having the same diet. And now you can see that they're gaining more. At the end of the dry lot period, they were 9 kilos, which is about 20 pounds heavier. Remember, these animals, they had the same consumption, because they were just more feed efficient. And they were not receiving the product at this time. So this is all consequence of how their mothers were fed. And they never had access to the supplement during the grazing period. Now, we also saw an increase in their humoral immune response, or how they respond to vaccination. So those calves, once we vaccinated them, they increase the production of titers, antibody titers against 2 viruses that are highly correlated with bovine respiratory disease. So in theory, this indicates better immune protection, right, for those calves. Now, what happens to their metabolism? We also did this metabolome analysis that I told you before. It's very extensive. We did it several days. We did it before vaccination, during the vaccination, and after vaccination. Okay? And the reason that we do that is that every time you have an immunological challenge, whether it's a disease or vaccination, or weaning, for example, any type of stress, the body shifts their metabolism and they favor the immunological response. So they started, all the nutrients start, not all, but a lot part of the nutrients started to be shifted to support the immune system rather than grow. And the reason is the animal needs to survive whatever it's going on before he can grow. Right? So we look at all different time points to see what does it do to the metabolism before their immunological challenge and what it does after. And I'm not going to cover all of this. Overall, what it does cause a shift in the calves. A lot of the metabolism associated with amino acids and energy were altered. Okay. And during the vaccination, we saw that when the calves that were born from cows that received the product, they upregulated a lot of the pathways related to immune function. And that explains why they had better immune response to the vaccination. Okay. So overall, it just makes sense. It just helps explain very beautifully how the performance, the results that we saw in terms of performance. And something that was surprising to us is the effect on the microbiome of the calves. Remember, they were not consuming the product, but they still interact with the mom. They're still grazing the same place. They're eating the same trace mineral salt. They're drinking the same water source, right? They're leaking. They're touching each other. So there's cross-contamination between the mother and the calf. So even though they didn't consume the supplement, what we saw is that the effects that we observed on the mother in terms of microbiome was presented in the calves. And it continued even after the calves were weaned and they were put in the same diet. Those type of bacteria, they remain the same. So for example, we increase the bacteria that is responsible for carbohydrate, protein digestibility. We decrease the population of 2 bacteria that are involved with butyrate production. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that's important for the rumen health, but it's not very energy efficient. So it seems that we're favoring bacteria, right? Decreasing the bacteria that are producing energy sources that are less favorable. And we also decrease the percentage of this bacteria here, which people love to talk about, is the methane. Now, I don't know if it decreased the methane production of those calves, but it did decrease the population of bacteria that produce it. All right, so what are some of the outcomes? What are some of the potential studies that we can do later in the future, trying to mitigate some of the methane production in cow calf production? This could be one of them, right? And another one that we saw is that the reduction in this type of bacteria, this one here, is highly involved in anti-inflammatory responses, right? So everything connects very well and explained. So overall, this study just shows you that nutrition during pregnancy and early stages of their life is crucial for the rest of their life. And having preparing this mother better right before calving does pay off. Even if there's no increase in their reproductive performance, it does seem to have consequences to health, immune response, growth of the calf. Right? So you're setting yourself for success down the road. And just a 20-pound increase on weaning weights of those calves, all right, at the end of the study, that's more than enough to pay for the product. It costed 8, 20 pounds more now is more than $50. And so even if you don't care about anything that I just said, it makes sense in terms of financial. Now, what about multiparous cows? This is a different category of animal. And this is interesting because multiparous cows, they tend to shift less nutrients to the fetus compared to growing heifer. Right? They prioritize the fetus last in that. So we wanted to look at just the fact that you're looking at different age, there's a different category. It's interesting to see if you're going to have the same results or not. But multiparous cows, you were not going to supplement them with soy hulls every day like we did for that study. It's very impractical. Not all situations you're going to do it. So in this study, what we did, we mix it with the trace mineral salt, trying to be very practical and apply for those producers. So what you do, you just add it to the salt, and then you provide it throughout the entire year. And we started just like the other study. We started 3 months before calving, and then we continue all the way to weaning. Now, weaning in this study here was done at 9 months of age. Okay, we didn't early wean them. So now, once the calves and now in this study here is also that it's unique, is that the calves had access to the supplement. So the moment that they were born, they were able to eat the trace mineral salt from the mothers. I don't know how much they ate. Well, we were not able to measure the individual intake of the animals, but we know that they were consuming the product. Right? They were there, they were interested, they were curious, they were leaking, and throughout this whole since the day that they were born. Okay. So what we saw was, and then all the students they measured, and the students in Judah they measured the intake of trace mineral salt every week for the whole year. And those are 26 pastures, 300 animals. So it's a lot of work. But look at the data that they found. And as you would expect, trace mineral salt consumption varies a lot throughout the year, fluctuates a lot. It's high at the beginning, then it stabilizes. And then once it starts raining, you have a little bit more consumption. There's a lot of environmental factors involved here. Once you start providing winter supplementation, you see a decrease in trace mineral salt intake. So they're not meeting their requirements. This is very common to happen. Now, overall, we see there are a few days that when you added the product, the cows consume a little bit more of trace mineral salt. So in average, even though they have periods that they were below the target amount, in average, they consume the 2 ounces that we wanted every day. Okay. Now, so adding the product did not decrease the consumption. Did not create any aversion of it. Now we look at performance of the cows during the pre-calving period. Now this time we don't see any increase in pre-calving body condition score when we added the product. Right? Perhaps because of this, like I said at the beginning, interaction between forage quality, animal category. This can all be explanation why it didn't work. We did see an increase in body condition score during the breeding season when they're consuming low quality hay. But the increment was very minor. Right? It would be hard to pick up the difference using your eyes. Right? And that's why we didn't see any differences on pregnancy rates. So both cows, they kept an excellent body condition score. They kept a body condition score 6, which is really high for those animals in this type of pasture. And that already masks some of the potential of the product. So those mature cows, if they kept this high body condition score and they start the breeding season at a body condition score 5, they're going to do well. And there's very minimal impact of nutrition here. Okay. Now, what happened to the calf? At birth, no effects. But look at within 24 hours of birth, we collected the blood work from those animals. And the calves that were born from cows that received the product, they had greater IgG. IgG is a immunoglobulin, right? It's an antibody that can actually help animals with their immune function. So it indicates better immune transfer from the mother to the calf, right? And we don't know exactly what's going on here, why that increased. But in dairy, there's indication that when you provide a product to pregnant cows, dairy cows, when they calve, the colostrum has higher concentrations of this immunoglobulin. So perhaps the colostrum of those cows were either better, or the calves consume more colostrum, or they absorb more immunoglobulin. We don't know exactly why, But this is important, okay? A 10, 15% increase in immunoglobulin can, in some instances, help protect those calves against disease. Now, what happened to their performance? At the end, during the breeding season, the calves also gain a little bit more. And this is the same time that their mothers gain more body conditioning score. And then when you calculate from birth all the way to weaning, those calves that were on pastures that were receiving this bacillus bacteria, they have greater average daily gain. So they were weaned about 5 kilos heavier, so that's roughly 12 pounds more. So 12 pounds, that's probably 30 something dollars. And for the entire year, it costed 12. All right. So again, if you don't care about any of the physiological effects, just you costing you 12, you're getting 30. All right. And this is if you sell calves at wean. Now, this study here, what you guys probably didn't see is these results here. We kept some of the heifers and we raised them here and developed them and we bred them as yearlings. And then we also kept some of the steers. Now, the heifers, we don't see any effects on their performance. Okay. But remember, this time they were not receiving the product once they were weaned. I will show you a study from Connor that 2 years of data that the heifers were consuming the product during the post-weaning period. They were developed when we were developing them, and we do see some positive effects on their reproduction. But in this case, if they're not consuming the product, if they came from a mother that consumed before weaning, it didn't really do anything. And it happens, right? Not everything works 100% all the time. Now, what about the steers? The steers, we weaned them. We kept them here at ONA for about 60 days for preconditioning, where we vaccinate and feed them. And then once we ended this preconditioning period, we send them to a feedlot, and we finish them in that feedlot in about 200 days. So what we see is also, again, no effects of treatment, right, on their performance or intake during the post-weaning period. And again, the animals were not consuming the product once they were weaned. It's just what that means is that there's no residual effect from whatever they consumed during the pre-weaning period. However, when we look at their blood, we did see an increase in their antibody titers, similar to the study that I showed you before. So even though they were not consuming the product, there are some residual effects on their immune response. And calves that were consuming the product before weaning, they tended to have better immune function. Now, when we send them to the feedlot, like I showed you, they gain exactly the same weight, right? But when we look at the carcass quality of those animals, we see a pretty good shift in their carcass quality distribution. So overall, what happened, we decreased the percentage of carcasses grading select, and we increased the percentage of carcasses grading low choice and prime. So when you calculate the percentage of carcasses grading low choice or above, 95, 96% of those carcasses grading low choice or better, whereas only 76% graded better. So that shows you that changing the nutrition during pregnancy, during early months of their life, can also have consequences on carcass quality later down the road. So if you're retaining steers and this is something that you're looking for, it seems to work very well. All right. So overall, what I want to show you is this type of research is new, so we don't have any other study to compare. So this is what we found. It worked very well, not 100%, but it does work very well. And it seems that it's very cost effective. It's easy to do, and it does provide benefits to all kinds of segments of the cow-calf industry. Okay, I'm not making advertisement about the product. I'm just saying that the concept works. Now, does every probiotic that has the same result? I don't know. Probably not. Does every strain has the same result? Probably not. So that's the beauty about this type of research, because there's a lot of things that we can still evaluate and to give you a better response. But so far, what we've done, it seems to work very well. So before I end, just want to thank you, the Cattlemen Association, for funding part of those studies. Okay, and also, of course, Novonesis, which used to be called Christian Hansen, if you do not know that. And I would like to thank Dr. Capelosa. He's the one that really pushed the company to provide these fundings and get all these studies done. So a lot of these students are being paid by these grants and being leveraged with the money from the cattlemen. So it's a good synergy between the industry and the producer association and the resource. All right. So With that, I would like to take any questions. Well, I don't see anybody. If anybody in the chat has any questions, just please send me an email, and I'll be glad to answer that at a later time. All right, so thank you.
Thank you again for joining us for today's ONA Highlight. I have a few announcements before you go. First off, I would like very much to invite you to come back in October on the 14th for our ONA Highlight with Hannah Baker and Allie Williams. They will be talking about calf value and management, what Florida agents learned visiting Texas feedlots. And whenever I send you guys the recording of today's ONA Highlight, along with, if it's okay with Dr. Moriel, a link so that you can see a handout of the PowerPoint, I'll include this information in case you might like to register for this event. I'll also include the flyers for these upcoming events. The herd health program that was scheduled for September or August, I can't remember. It was rescheduled for September 16th, and that is an evening program from 6 to 8. The registration is $25, and that includes a barbecue dinner and the educational materials. But you want to register by September 12th. So want to do that soon if you're interested. Pasture, rangeland, forage insurance webinar is a webinar that is going to be held September the 18th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. There is no cost to attend, and you'll want to look into that. Also, we have a program coming up called Ranching Foundations. That one's going to be held at the Seminole Tribe of Florida Cattle and Range Building there in Okeechobee on Reservation Road. That is a daytime program from 10 to 2:30 p.m. on October 23rd. And registration for that one is $20, and that includes lunch and educational materials. If you're not already doing so, we invite you to follow us on social media or check out our website. There's a lot of helpful information there. And if you do not receive our weekly Friday email news, send us an email to ona@ifas.ufl.edu, and we will put you on our contact list so that you will get very timely information about programs going on, events happening here, visitors, all sorts of wonderful stuff. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in October. Thank you.